The salt shaker hit the table so hard it nearly tipped over. "Mom. Where's the salt? I've been calling you for 10 minutes. I was standing right there. 3 feet away, at the counter, cutting bread that nobody asked me to cut but everybody would eat. I picked up the salt shaker and placed it next to my son's plate without saying a word. He didn't look up. He was already scrolling through his phone with one hand and reaching for the shaker with the other, and the conversation at the table just kept going, loud and overlapping, like I hadn't moved, like I wasn't there, like I was furniture that occasionally produced food. My name is Eleanor. I am 63 years old. And on that particular Sunday evening, standing in a kitchen that smelled like roast chicken and dish soap, I made a decision that would change everything. But let me take you back. Let me show you the whole picture. Because if I just told you what happened at the end, you wouldn't understand what the beginning cost me. That Sunday dinner was a war zone dressed up as a family meal. My son, David, sat at the head of the table. That used to be my seat. I don't know exactly when the transition happened. It was gradual, the way all losses are, not a single moment of taking, but a slow accumulation of small surrenders until one day you look up and realize you are sitting at the corner of a table in a house you raised 2 children in, waiting to be told there isn't enough room for your glass. David's wife, Sandra, sat beside him with a yellow legal pad. She had taken to bringing it to dinner. She said it was for family planning, which was a phrase that meant, in practice, planning what everyone else should contribute and what Sandra should receive. My daughter, Patricia, sat across from her brother, laughing too loudly at something David had said, the way she always did when she wanted him on her side before asking for something. And then there was me. Corner seat. Closest to the kitchen, so I could jump up. Furthest from the window, so the light didn't quite reach me. I had cooked the chicken, roasted the potatoes, made the salad from scratch, and baked a lemon cake that was cooling on the counter. My contribution to the evening had started at 2 in the afternoon and it was now nearly 7. My feet hurt. My lower back had been sending me quiet, insistent messages since 5 o'clock. I ignored them. I was good at ignoring myself. The mortgage went up again, David said, stabbing a piece of chicken. 300 more a month. I'm telling you, Sandra, this city is trying to kill us. It's not the city, Sandra said, clicking her pen. It's the interest rates. We need to restructure. What does restructure even mean? Patricia asked, but she was smiling like she already knew and just wanted to seem casual. It means we look at everything, Sandra said. She glanced at me briefly. Just briefly. But I felt it the way you feel a draft from a window you can't close. Everything we're spending money on. Everything that could be optimized. I pressed my foot against the floor and kept eating. Mom, Patricia said, in the voice she used when she was about to say something she'd already rehearsed, you don't need that much space anymore, do you? I mean, realistically. The kids are grown. It's just you rattling around in that room. That room. She called it that room. It was the room I had slept in for 31 years. The room where I nursed David through pneumonia when he was 7. The room where I sat on the floor at 2 in the morning when Patricia's first boyfriend broke her heart, holding her while she cried into a pillow so she wouldn't wake her brother. That room. I'm comfortable, I said. Comfortable isn't the same as practical, Sandra said, and she wrote something on her legal pad. I couldn't see what it was, but I felt it in my chest. David cleared his throat. We're just trying to be practical, Mom. That's all. Nobody's attacking you. I looked at my son. He was 41 years old and he had my husband's jawline and his father's habit of saying nobody's attacking you right after someone attacked you. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 6 years. Heart attack, quiet, fast, mercifully quick. I used to be grateful for that. Now, in moments like this, I was just grateful he couldn't see what his family had become. Pass the bread? Patricia asked brightly, and just like that, the conversation shifted, the way it always did, like a river that runs around a rock without acknowledging the rock exists. I passed the bread. And under the table, my fingers found the key in my pocket. I carried it everywhere. It was old and rusted, small enough to close my fist around, and it had a particular weight that felt, to me, like a promise. Like a secret I was keeping from people who had never once asked me what I was thinking. They thought I had nothing. They had no idea what I had been quietly building. Let me go back further. 14 months earlier, on a Tuesday in November. The funeral home was almost empty. Aunt Martha had not been what anyone would call a social person. She was my mother's younger sister, a woman who had lived alone in a small cottage 2 hours outside the city, who kept a lavender garden and 4 cats and very strong opinions about public libraries. She sent me birthday cards every year without fail. She was the only one who did. When she died, the notice in the paper was 3 lines long. I took a bus to the funeral because David said he couldn't get off work and Patricia said she hadn't even really known Martha, which was true but felt like exactly the wrong thing to say about the dead. There were 11 people at the service. I sat near the back. The minister said lovely, general things about a woman I knew had been extraordinary in all the ways the world doesn't bother to measure. Afterward, a lawyer named Gerald Holt approached me in the parking lot. He was a small, neat man with an umbrella he wasn't using yet, even though rain had started to fall. "Mrs. Eleanor Marsh," he said. "Yes. I'm Gerald Holt. I handled your aunt's estate." He paused. "She left specific instructions about who should receive what. You are her primary beneficiary." I stared at him. "I'm sorry?" "She was quite specific." He handed me an envelope. "There's a cottage, a small account, and a key." He produced the key from his coat pocket. It was rusted and old and strangely beautiful. She said, and I'm quoting directly here because she made me memorize it, she said, "Eleanor will understand what to do with it." I held the key in my palm and looked at it for a long time. "The account," I said carefully. "How substantial is it?" He told me. I had to breathe very deliberately for a moment. "And she left nothing to no one else," he said gently. She was quite clear. I drove to the cottage that afternoon, before I went home, before I told a single person what had happened. I used the key on the old wooden door, and when it swung open, the smell that came out was lavender and cedar and old books, and I stood in the doorway for a long moment while the rain fell behind me, and I did something I hadn't done since Robert's funeral. I cried. Not from sadness. From something more complicated than that. From the recognition that someone had seen me. Someone had quietly, deliberately, specifically seen me and said, "You. This is for you. Not your family. Not your children. You." I sat down in Martha's kitchen chair. I looked at the garden through the window. The lavender was brown and sleeping in November, but I could see the structure of it, the rows, the care that had gone into it. And I thought about something I had been too afraid to think for a very long time. What if I didn't tell them? Not to be cruel. Not to deceive. But to find out something I needed to know. I wanted to know if they loved me without a reason. I wanted to know if, stripped of everything I could provide, I was still someone they valued. I wanted to sit at that corner of the dinner table and watch, really watch, and understand who my family was when they thought there was nothing to gain. So I went home. I made dinner. I said nothing. I started visiting the cottage once a week. I need you to understand what those weeks looked like. Because it wasn't dramatic. That's the thing nobody tells you about slow erasure. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives in small, ordinary moments stacked so neatly on top of each other that by the time you feel the weight, you are already far underground. Tuesdays, I babysat Patricia's 2 boys. She would drop them off at 7:30 in the morning and collect them at 6 in the evening. She would hand them to me still in their pajamas, sometimes, which meant I also did the dressing and the breakfast and the morning moods. I loved those boys. I want to be clear about that. I loved them with the specific, exhausted love of someone who understands that children are not responsible for their parents. But I was 62 years old with a bad back and 2 grandsons under 6, and Patricia said thank you approximately once a month, and even then it was the distracted kind, the kind said while checking a phone. Wednesdays, Sandra had what she called her day, which meant I was expected to be available for David's household. Picking up dry cleaning. Signing for packages. Making sure the cleaner got in. I was not the cleaner. I was the cleaner supervisor, which in practice meant I did everything the cleaner didn't feel like doing. Thursdays, I cooked for the week. For their week. My son's family had stopped grocery shopping in any meaningful way because it was simply easier for Mom to handle it. I don't know when that became a system. It just did. The way things just do, when you keep saying yes. And Friday mornings, quietly, before anyone was awake, I drove to the cottage. Those 2 hours every week were the only hours in which I was completely myself. I would park on the gravel path, unlock the old door, walk into the lavender cedar silence, and just breathe. I cleared the garden slowly, week by week. I cleaned each room. I found Martha's books and began reading them in order, sitting in the kitchen chair by the window, with tea I made from loose leaves I found in a blue ceramic tin. I used some of the inheritance interest to fund a small scholarship at the local secondary school. Martha had cared about education. It felt right. I also set up a monthly donation to the animal rescue 2 towns over. Quietly. In Martha's name. None of this I told anyone. They thought I had nothing. I had already begun to build a life they would never understand. By spring, the family's behavior had shifted in ways that were subtle enough to explain away but consistent enough to terrify. David asked me for money for the first time in March. It was framed as a loan. It was presented with a spreadsheet. Sandra had made the spreadsheet, which I found more alarming than the request itself, because it meant the request had been planned, discussed, agreed upon, and then theatrically presented as spontaneous. It's just a bridge, David said. 3 months, maybe 4. Just while the market stabilizes. How much? I asked. He told me. It was the exact amount I had in my personal checking account. Not my inheritance account. My checking account. He knew what I had in my checking account because I had once, stupidly, asked him to help me set up online banking, and he had seen the balance, and he had remembered it. I'll think about it, I said. He looked surprised. He had not expected to have to wait. In April, Patricia called to tell me she needed me full-time. Full-time? I repeated. The boys need consistency, she said. And honestly, Mom, you're not doing anything during the day. This gives you purpose. The boys love you. It's a win for everyone. I said I would think about it. In May, Sandra made her suggestion at the dinner table. She didn't address it to me directly. She addressed it to David, in front of me, as though I were a logistical problem to be solved rather than a person to be consulted. I think it might make sense, she said, cutting her chicken into very small pieces. For Eleanor to start contributing financially to the household. I've done the numbers and it's really only fair, considering everything she uses. Everything she uses, I repeated softly. Nobody heard me. That's not a bad idea, David said, and he said it like he was being generous, like he was doing me the favor of accepting my money. I touched the key in my pocket. Under the table, my hand was completely steady. The thing about being treated as invisible is that it gives you extraordinary freedom to observe. I watched Sandra for months. She was not a villain. I want to say that clearly because it matters. She was a woman who had learned that resources were limited and you had to claim yours before someone else did, and she had married into a family where that lesson had never been challenged. She was strategic rather than cruel. That distinction matters, but it didn't make sitting across from that legal pad every Sunday any easier. I watched David. My son. My firstborn. I had held him when he was 4 hours old in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and flowers someone had already sent, and I had made him a promise without words, the way mothers do, that I would always be there. He had grown into a man who mistook always for unconditionally, which are very different promises. I watched Patricia. My daughter, who could make a room light up and also make you feel like the room was lit up for everyone except you. She had my mother's laugh and her father's blindness, the particular blindness that belongs to people who have been so thoroughly loved that they cannot quite comprehend its cost. And I watched myself. I watched myself stand and fetch things. I watched myself absorb sentences that should have been questions but arrived as commands. I watched myself smile at jokes made at my expense and call it being a good sport. I watched myself become smaller and smaller and smaller until some evenings I sat in my corner of the table and genuinely could not remember who I had been before I became someone's mother and someone's widow and someone's convenience. But on Friday mornings, driving to the cottage with the window cracked and the radio on low, I remembered. I was Eleanor. I had once wanted to be a teacher and had been, briefly, before children made that complicated and then impossible. I had opinions about architecture and a weakness for detective novels, and I could grow things from seed. I knew how to be alone without being lonely. I had been loved, genuinely, by a man who saw all of me, and by an aunt who had left me a rusted key and a lavender garden and a life I had not yet claimed. I was Eleanor, and I had been patient long enough. I need to tell you about the intervention. They called it a family conversation. David sent a text on a Wednesday, family dinner Sunday, important we're all there, please don't make plans. He had never once asked me if I had plans. He had simply assumed I didn't, which was so consistently true that it had stopped being an assumption and become a fact. I arrived at the dinner table that Sunday to find the food already served. They had not waited for me. My plate was there but nobody had filled it, which I understood was its own kind of message. David cleared his throat. Sandra set down her legal pad. Patricia took a breath that she had clearly been practicing. Mom, David started, we want to talk to you about something, and we want you to know it comes from a place of love. Whenever someone tells you something comes from a place of love, brace yourself. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Sandra said, taking over with the smooth efficiency of someone who has been elected spokesperson, about the household, and about the future, and about what makes sense for everyone. Financially. Practically. We think, Patricia said, that it might make more sense for you to have your own space. Something smaller. More manageable. More manageable, I said. A studio apartment, David said. There's one 2 streets over. It's actually very nice. Modern. You'd have your own kitchen. Your own everything. And this room? I asked. Sandra's pen was already hovering. Well, that's the thing. The room is large enough to generate meaningful rental income, which would benefit the whole family. It would solve a lot of the financial pressure. I see, I said. It's only fair, Mom, David said. He leaned forward slightly, and his expression was the one he used when he thought he was being reasonable. We've done so much for you. We've had you here, all these years. It's only fair that things evolve. We've done so much for you. I heard that sentence the way you hear a door closing. I looked at my son. I looked at my daughter. I looked at Sandra with her legal pad. And then I looked down at my hands, which were folded in my lap, which were not shaking, which surprised me, because something had just broken inside my chest in a way I could feel physically, a clean, precise fracture, the kind that doesn't bleed but changes the structure of everything permanently. "Ah," I said quietly. Just that. Just the one sound. "So this is who you are," I said, "when I have nothing left to give." Nobody answered. Patricia opened her mouth and closed it. David shifted in his seat. Sandra clicked her pen. "We're not saying," David started. "It's all right," I said. "I understand." And I did understand. Completely and finally, and with a clarity I had been postponing for years. The litmus test was complete. I had my answer. I excused myself to make tea. Standing in the kitchen alone, I put both hands flat on the counter and breathed very slowly. Outside the window, it was getting dark. I could hear them in the dining room, talking quietly, the conspiratorial murmur of people who think they've won something. My hand went to my pocket. The rusted key was there. I stopped hoping. Not in bitterness, but in the way you stop waiting for a rain that was never going to come. Gently. With your eyes open. I want you to stay with me through this next part. This is important. I did not storm out. I did not make a speech. I did not cry or shout or throw anything. I went back to the table and I had my tea and I listened to the conversation turn to other things, the way it always did, and at the end of the evening I washed the dishes and dried the counter and went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. Then I took out a notebook and began to write. Not a letter. Not yet. Just numbers. Dates. Events. 15 years of entries in my memory, pulled out and set down in ink. Babysitting hours. Cooking. Cleaning. Emotional support provided during David's job loss in 2019. The 2 weeks I had slept on a fold-out cot so Patricia's family could use my room when their apartment flooded. Medical appointments I had cancelled for myself because someone else needed me. The money I had quietly lent and never been repaid. The gifts I had given and the thanks that had never arrived. It took me 3 nights to compile it. Then I started planning the week. I am telling you that the week I spent preparing to leave was the most peaceful week of my adult life, and I need you to understand that this is a melancholy kind of peace, the peace of someone who has finished grieving. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. This was something quieter and more final. Monday, I made David's favorite meal. Beef stew with dumplings. The kind that takes 4 hours and fills the whole house with warmth. He said, "Oh, great, stew," and carried his bowl to the couch to watch television. I watched him go and thought, this is the last stew. And then I washed the pot and went to bed. Tuesday, I babysat the boys. I held them closer than usual, my grandsons, these small people who were not responsible for any of this. The older one, Jamie, fell asleep against my shoulder in the afternoon and I sat very still for an hour rather than disturb him. These moments were mine, genuinely mine, and I held them carefully. Wednesday, I folded everyone's laundry. All of it. Every item, pressed and stacked. I cleaned the bathrooms until they shone. I wiped down the kitchen cupboards. I arranged the pantry. Every act was deliberate and complete and final. This is the last time. This is the last time. This is the last time. Thursday, I did the grocery shopping and cooked enough food for 2 weeks. I labeled everything. I put it in containers in the fridge and freezer with instructions written on small cards in my best handwriting. I did not know why I did this. Maybe because feeding people was the only language I had spoken for so long that I needed to say goodbye in it. Thursday evening, Patricia called. Mom, I need you Friday. I know it's your day, but I have this thing and I really need you for the boys. My day. She called it my day without knowing what it actually was. Without knowing that my day was the thread I was holding on to. Not this Friday, I said. Silence. What? I'm not available Friday. Mom, I really need, I know, I said. I'm sorry. I hung up. My hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the effort of a new habit. Friday morning. I woke before 5. The house was quiet in that particular way it only is very early, when the ordinary noise of living hasn't started yet. I made myself tea. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the dark slowly pale into gray. Then I went to my room. One suitcase. I had thought about this carefully. One suitcase, medium, the one I had bought for a trip Robert and I had taken to Portugal in 2009. Good trip. Good memory. I wanted the container of my new life to carry a good memory. I packed clothes. Practical, comfortable, a few things I genuinely liked. I took my reading glasses. My notebooks. The detective novels I had been working through. A photograph of Robert, one of him standing on a beach, squinting into the sun, laughing at something I had said. I took the small blue ceramic tea tin that had been Martha's, which I had transferred here weeks ago. I took my medicine. I left everything else. I left the furniture. I left the framed family portraits on the wall, my face among them, younger and less tired. I left the chair I had reupholstered myself. I left the curtains I had sewn. I left 31 years of a room that had never quite felt like mine since Robert died. I set the suitcase by the door. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the family table, in my corner seat, for the last time. I put both hands flat on the table. I looked at the room. The pot hooks above the stove. The chipped tile above the window that had been chipped since 2014 and nobody had fixed. The calendar on the wall with everyone's appointments on it but mine. Then I took out a piece of paper and a pen. The envelope I left on the table. On the outside, I wrote, for David, Sandra, and Patricia inside, the invoice. I had worked on it for 2 weeks. Every line documented with dates and reasonable market rates. Professional childcare. Domestic services. Household management. Emotional labor, which I had listed conservatively because I genuinely could not calculate what it would cost to hire a human being to care as much as I had cared for as many years as I had cared without acknowledgement or payment. The total was exactly the amount they had asked me for. The amount David had wanted to borrow. Exact, to the dollar. And at the bottom, in my best handwriting, asterisk everything in this house belongs to you. Just like I always did. Consider this my final contribution, asterisk, Eleanor. I picked up my suitcase. I picked up my handbag. I put my hand in my pocket and felt the rusted key. I walked to the front door. I did not look back. Not because I was hard, but because I had already done my looking. I had spent all week doing my looking, storing up the last images of the life I was leaving. I had what I needed. I closed the door quietly behind me. The street was pale and cool in the early morning. A bird was making a small, insistent noise in the tree by the gate. I put my suitcase in the boot of my car, got into the driver's seat, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Then I started the engine. I want to tell you what they found when they came home. David and Sandra returned at 6 in the evening. I know this because Patricia called me at 6:14, and when she spoke, her voice had a quality I had never quite heard in it before. Not anger. Shock. Mom. Hello, Patricia. Mom, where are you? I'm home, I said. Silence. This is home, I said. I've been telling you that for years, but I don't think anyone was listening. The envelope, yes. Mom, she stopped. I could hear her breathing. David is furious. I imagine he is. He says this is ridiculous. He says you can't actually, Patricia, I said, and I said it the way you say the name of someone you love but are finished arguing with. I spent 15 years making sure everyone in that house was fed and warm and cared for. I did it because I loved you. But I also did it because I had no idea I was allowed to stop. I know now. But where are you going to? Her voice broke slightly. Where are you going to go, Mom? What are you doing? I'm going to be fine, I said. I have a plan. What plan? What does that mean? You don't have, she stopped again. Do you have money? Do you have somewhere to go? I have everything I need, I said. I'll be in touch. I hung up. My phone rang 6 more times that evening. I did not answer. I turned it face down on the passenger seat and drove with the window open and the radio on low, and the smell of the evening came through the gap, something green and cool, and I breathed it in, and I kept driving. 2 hours outside the city, on a road that becomes gradually quieter and the trees come closer to the edges, there is a gravel path that turns off to the left. If you don't know it's there, you'll miss it. At the end of the path, there is a cottage with a wooden door and a lavender garden that in May was beginning to show its purple again, tentative and certain at the same time, the way spring things are. I parked on the gravel. I sat in the car for a moment. The evening was still and the light was the particular gold of late afternoon, the kind that makes everything look like a memory of something good. The lavender moved very slightly in a wind I couldn't feel from inside the car. I got out. I walked to the door. I put the rusted key in the lock. It had always turned smoothly, this key, despite the rust, as though it were designed for a specific hand, and that hand was mine. The door swung open. I stepped inside. The cottage was warm from the day's sun and it smelled of lavender and cedar and the particular quality of silence that lives in rooms that have been inhabited with care. I had been cleaning and tending it for over a year. The shelves had Martha's books, and now some of mine. The kitchen had the blue ceramic tin. The chair by the window had a cushion I had sewn from fabric I found at a market 3 towns over, a deep green fabric with a small yellow pattern. I set my suitcase down. I went to the kitchen and opened a bottle of wine I had bought 2 weeks ago and kept here, waiting. I poured a glass. I carried it to the porch. I sat down. The lavender stretched out in front of me, and beyond it the garden, and beyond it the trees at the edge of the property, and above everything the sky going slowly from gold to rose to the early deep blue of a clear evening. I took a breath. It went all the way in. I felt it in my hands. I cannot tell you the last time a breath had gone all the way in. My phone had 17 messages by the next morning. I read them all. David was angry, then confused, then briefly conciliatory in a way that felt like the start of a negotiation rather than a genuine thing. Sandra's message was practical, she wanted to discuss the invoice. Patricia's messages moved through a progression that started with irritation and arrived, by the 6th message, at something that might have been genuine distress. The 17th message was from Patricia and it said, "Mom, I'm scared you're alone. Please tell me you're okay." I read that one 3 times. Then I wrote her back, "I'm okay. Better than okay. I'll call when I'm ready." I put the phone in a drawer. I made tea from the blue ceramic tin. I opened Martha's copy of a detective novel I hadn't read yet. I sat in the kitchen chair by the window and watched the morning come into the lavender garden, and I read 14 pages before I stood up to make breakfast, and breakfast was exactly what I wanted, which was eggs and toast and the particular quiet of eating a meal that no one was going to interrupt. In the weeks that followed, things happened. David called a lawyer, briefly, to understand whether the invoice was enforceable. The lawyer told him, I am told, that it was a creative document rather than a legal one, and that his mother had clearly not intended to litigate it, and that he should perhaps think carefully about what the document was actually saying to him. David did not like this answer. Patricia came to the cottage. She showed up without calling, which was characteristic. She stood on the gravel path with her arms crossed and her eyes already red, and when I opened the door, she said, "You have a garden," as though this were the most shocking thing she had encountered. "I do," I said. "Come in." I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table, the two of us, and she looked around at the room with the books and the green cushion and the lavender through the window, and she was quiet for a long time. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "A little over a year." "A year," she repeated. "Your great-aunt Martha left it to me. I didn't even go to her funeral." "No," I said. She looked at her tea. "I've been thinking about what you wrote on the invoice. Everything here belongs to you. Just like I always did." She paused. "Did you really feel that? Like you belonged to us? Like you weren't your own person?" "For a very long time," I said, "yes." She was quiet again. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said, because I wanted to be clear. "I'm not asking for anything. I left because I chose to leave, and I'm telling you I'm fine because I am fine, and I will be in touch because I want to be in touch, on my own terms, in my own time. But I need you to understand that I will not go back to what that was." "The invoice," she said slowly. "The amount. That was the exact amount David asked you for." "Yes. That wasn't an accident." "No." She looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, something that I recognized after a moment as respect, which was a thing I had not seen from my daughter in years, and which landed in me quietly and without drama. "I should have been better," she said. "You should have," I agreed. "So should I. I should have said all of this a long time ago. Instead I kept quiet and called it love." "Is it too late?" she asked. I looked at my daughter. I thought about the boys asleep on her couch, the older one who falls asleep on shoulders, the younger one who laughs like his grandfather. "For a different kind of relationship?" I said. "No. It's not too late. But the old kind is finished." She nodded. She stayed for 2 hours. She helped me plant 3 new rows of lavender, both of us kneeling in the dirt, neither of us saying much. When she left, she hugged me at the car and held on for longer than she had in years. I went inside and sat at the table and felt the complicated, layered feeling of loving people while also being done with their particular version of you. Both things, fully. At the same time. David took longer. He came 3 weeks after Patricia, with Sandra. I had not expected Sandra. She stood slightly behind David on the gravel path, which also surprised me, because Sandra did not habitually stand behind anyone. I made tea for 3. We sat. David was uncomfortable in the specific way of a man who knows he was wrong but has not yet found a way to say it that doesn't also make him the hero of the story. He tried several versions of an apology before Sandra, of all people, put her hand on his arm and said, quietly, "David. Just say it plainly." He looked at her. Then he looked at me. "I took you for granted," he said. "I think I've been doing it for years. I think I let Sandra." He stopped. "No. I let myself. I let myself stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource, and that's not something I want to be true about me, and I'm sorry. I absorbed this. I won't pretend I know how to fix it quickly," he said. "But I'd like to try." I looked at my son for a long time. I thought about the 7-year-old with pneumonia. I thought about teaching him to ride a bicycle on the path outside our old house, the one before this one, the one before children and mortgages and complicated everything. I thought about the good years, the genuinely good years, when we had been a family in the real sense. I'm not available to be managed anymore, I said. I'm not available to be optimized. I'm not a line on a spreadsheet. I know, he said. But I'm your mother, I said. I'm not finished being your mother. I just need you to understand the difference between a mother and a servant. He nodded. His eyes were bright in the way that meant he was holding something back. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. Sandra looked around at the cottage. It's lovely here, she said, and the word lovely in her voice was genuine, stripped of the spreadsheet quality, just a woman in a lavender garden saying something true. It is, I said. I am not telling you that everything resolved perfectly. Life is not a document you can invoice and close. David still occasionally says things without thinking. Patricia still sometimes calls and speaks for 5 minutes before asking how I am. These are habits of decades, and they don't dissolve in a single honest conversation. But they can change. Slowly. Deliberately. With patience that is chosen rather than endured. What changed completely, without negotiation or compromise, was me. I wake up now in the cottage and the first feeling is not dread. It's not the low-grade anxiety of anticipating someone else's needs. It's something I had honestly forgotten existed as a daily experience, a feeling so simple it seems almost not worth naming, except it is the most important feeling I know, which is that the day ahead belongs to me. I take my tea to the porch. The lavender is doing beautifully now. The scholarship fund has supported 4 students in the past year, and I received a letter from one of them, a girl named Mia who wants to study architecture, and I put it on the refrigerator and looked at it every morning for a week. I have joined a reading group in the village. There are 8 of us, 4 women and 2 men and a retired botanist named George who argues about everything and is always right. I look forward to Thursdays in a way I had forgotten looking forward felt. I have begun, very slowly, to write. Not letters. Not invoices. A memoir of sorts, or maybe something between a memoir and a map, the kind of document that says here is where I was, here is what I did not say, here is the moment I chose to come back to myself. I don't know if anyone will read it. I find I don't mind either way. There are moments, still, when I am sitting on the porch in the evening with the wine and the lavender and the sky doing its slow gorgeous color changes, and I think about that table. The corner seat. The salt shaker being demanded. The legal pad. The way they talked over me for years, around me for years, through me for years, the way I smiled and fetched and cooked and folded and shrank and called it love. And then I think about the key. This rusted, ordinary, miraculous key. A quiet woman in a cottage left it to me and said, "You'll know what to do." And she was right. She was completely right. Because what I did was exactly what she had done, I built a life nobody could take from me. I built it quietly, on weekdays, in the early morning before anyone was awake, with lavender and tea and books and scholarship money and the names of animals rescued and a reading group and a retired botanist who was always right. I built it key by key. I lost a version of my family that night at the dinner table. The version where I sat in the corner and waited to be needed. The version where I confused being needed with being loved, where I confused staying with belonging, where I confused giving everything with having something. That version of Eleanor is gone. What I found instead, sitting on a porch in a lavender garden in the late evening, with a wine glass and a rusted key on the table beside me and the whole quiet extraordinary fact of my own life stretching in every direction, is something I don't have a single clean word for. It is not happiness, exactly, though it contains happiness. It is not peace, exactly, though it is full of peace. It is closer to this: I am finally, completely, irreversibly here. I am at the head of my own table. I am sitting in the light. If this story moved you in any way, if it made you think about someone you know or something you've been holding, please give it a like right now. It helps more people find this story, and some of those people might need it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories like this one, stories about quiet courage and late starts and the extraordinary ordinary things that change lives. And leave me a comment below. I read every single one. Tell me, is there an Eleanor in your life? Or are you the Eleanor? I'd love to know. I keep the key on the kitchen table now. Not in my pocket anymore. There's no need to keep it hidden. It sits next to the blue ceramic tin, and sometimes when the morning light comes through the window at the right angle, even the rust on it looks like something worth keeping. Martha was right. I knew exactly what to do.